The wind howled like a wounded beast, hurling snow against the cabin's thick wooden walls. Inside, the fire crackled in defiance of the bitter cold that had settled over the forest. Ethan Matthews sat in his worn leather chair, a book open on his lap, though his eyes had stopped following the words some time ago. Instead, he stared into the dancing flames, listening to the storm's fury. His cabin stood alone, miles from the nearest neighbor, exactly as he preferred it. The isolation suited him. No expectations, no disappointments, no betrayals. Just him, the forest, and the changing seasons that marked time with indifferent precision. Ethan reached for his coffee mug, the liquid inside long gone cold. He grimaced at the taste, but drank it anyway. Waste not, want not. One of the many lessons his grandfather had taught him before the old man passed. The memory brought a fleeting smile to his weathered face. At 42, Ethan's dark hair had begun graying at the temples, and fine lines had etched themselves around his eyes that had seen too much during his years of service. 10 years as a combat engineer in war zones across 3 continents had left him with skills most civilians would never need, and memories most would never want. The cabin, which he had built with his own hands 5 years ago, was his sanctuary. Every beam, every floorboard, every carefully fitted window was a testament to his need for control, for order in a chaotic world. Solar panels, a backup generator, a sophisticated water filtration system, and enough stored supplies to last through any winter storm, all ensuring he needed nothing and no one. On shelves built into the wall beside the fireplace sat his few personal possessions: technical manuals, a collection of classic novels, and a small wooden box containing his service medals, reminders of a life he had walked away from. He kept no photographs, no mementos of relationships long severed. The past was the past. Tonight, the storm seemed determined to test the cabin's limits. The wind found every crack, every seam, whispering its cold threats. Ethan added another log to the fire, watching as sparks spiraled up the chimney. Just another night, he murmured to himself, a habit born of solitude. He glanced at his watch, nearly midnight. Time for his final perimeter check before bed. It was unnecessary, he knew. His alarm system was state-of-the-art, another holdover from his military days. But routine provided comfort in its predictability. Ethan pulled on his heavy wool sweater and moved toward the door. As he reached for his coat, hanging on the hook, he paused. Something, a sound beneath the wind's howl, had caught his attention. He tilted his head, listening. There it came again. A faint, irregular tapping. Not branches against the roof or walls. He knew those sounds intimately after years in this cabin. This was different, more deliberate. Knocking, someone was knocking at his door. Ethan froze, his hand halfway to the shotgun mounted above the coat rack. No one came here, especially not in the middle of a snowstorm at midnight. The nearest town was 30 miles away, and he had made it clear to the few people who knew of his existence that visitors were unwelcome. The knocking came again, weaker this time, barely audible. His military training kicked in. Approach with caution. Assess before engaging. He moved silently to the window beside the door, careful to stay out of sight as he peered into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but swirling snow illuminated by the porch light. Then a movement. A dark shape huddled against his door. Small. Too small to be an adult. Ethan's heart rate accelerated. A child? Out here? Impossible. The knocking stopped. The shape slumped lower, cursing under his breath. Ethan unbolted the door and yanked it open, the wind immediately rushing in to extinguish the candles on the side table. It was not a child, not a human at all. Collapsed on his threshold, covered in snow, lay a figure that could only be described as otherworldly. Slender limbs, too long to be human. Skin that gleamed faintly blue-silver in the light spilling from the cabin. And when the creature's face turned upward, large, almond-shaped eyes, violet in color, set in a delicate, almost triangular face. An alien. One of the visitors that had made contact with Earth 15 years ago. Ethan had seen them on news broadcasts before he disconnected from society, but never in person. Never like this, injured, shivering violently, clothed in what appeared to be little more than rags. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, snow swirling around him, as the alien's eyes locked with his. In them, he saw something universally recognizable: terror, exhaustion, and a desperate plea. Then those extraordinary eyes closed, and the alien's body went limp. Ethan looked past the collapsed figure into the dark forest beyond his clearing. Empty. But something, instinct, perhaps, told him that whatever had driven this being to his door wasn't far behind. With a muttered curse, he bent down and carefully gathered the alien into his arms. Surprisingly light, despite being nearly as tall as he was. He could feel ribs beneath the thin, tattered clothing, and the creature's skin was ice cold. "What the hell am I doing?" he whispered, as he kicked the door shut behind him and carried his unexpected visitor to the fire. Ethan laid the alien gently on the thick rug before the hearth, then quickly retrieved every blanket he could find. As he wrapped the first around the thin, shivering form, the alien's eyes fluttered open briefly, that violet gaze disoriented and fearful. "You're safe," Ethan said, not knowing if the creature could understand him. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien made a soft, unintelligible sound before losing consciousness again. Ethan worked methodically, his combat medic training taking over. Check for injuries. Ensure airway is clear. Elevate feet slightly. Gradual warming to prevent shock. The alien had several cuts and bruises visible through the torn clothing, but nothing that appeared life-threatening. The main concerns were hypothermia and exhaustion. As he wrapped another blanket around the alien's shoulders, Ethan noticed something troubling: dark bruising around the wrists, the kind left by restraints. And when he gently shifted the collar of the ragged shirt, he saw what appeared to be a burn mark on the slender neck, deliberate and geometric in shape. A brand. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen similar marks before, on human trafficking victims in war zones. The implication made his stomach turn. He built up the fire, then heated some soup. Simple vegetable broth. Nothing too rich that might shock a starved system. As the cabin warmed, the alien's shivering gradually subsided, though unconsciousness remained. Ethan settled into his chair, shotgun within reach, eyes fixed on his unexpected guest. He should have left the door closed, should have minded his own business. Involvement meant complications, and complications were precisely what he'd come here to escape. Yet, as he watched the slow rise and fall of the alien's chest beneath the pile of blankets, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Whatever had happened to this being, whatever danger might follow, he couldn't have left them to die in the snow. Just until the storm passes, he told himself firmly. Then we'll figure out what to do with you. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and somewhere in the distance, though Ethan couldn't hear it, something mechanical hummed as it scanned the forest floor for tracks in the fresh fallen snow. The alien woke with a start, a small, strangled cry escaping before thin fingers clamped over its own mouth. Those large violet eyes darted frantically around the cabin before settling on Ethan, who had moved to a chair nearby, deliberately keeping his distance to appear less threatening. "You're safe," he said quietly, repeating his earlier assurance. "The storm's still raging. You collapsed at my door?" The alien's gaze remained wary, body tensed beneath the blankets, as if ready to flee. Ethan noticed that despite the warming cabin, the being still shivered occasionally, not from cold, he suspected, but from fear. "I'm Ethan," he said, touching his chest. Then, remembering the soup he'd prepared, he slowly reached for the mug on the side table. "Are you hungry? It's just vegetable broth." He held out the mug, making no move to approach. After a long moment of consideration, the alien cautiously extended a hand from beneath the blankets and took it. Long, slender fingers nearly twice the length of a human's. The being sniffed the liquid tentatively, then took a small sip. Relief flooded those alien features, and the creature began to drink more eagerly. Ethan noticed how carefully the alien held the mug, as if it were something precious and fragile. When the soup was finished, the alien set the mug down on the floor with precise movements. Then, looked at Ethan with an expression that seemed like gratitude, though it was difficult to be certain with such different facial structures. Ethan pointed to himself again. "Ethan!" The alien blinked, then pointed a long finger at him. "Ethan!" came the reply, the voice melodic but hoarse, as if unused to speaking. "Yes," Ethan nodded, encouraged. "And you? What's your name?" The alien hesitated, head tilting slightly. Then, one hand rose to touch its own chest. "Lura." "Lura," Ethan repeated, trying to capture the subtle inflection. The name seemed abbreviated somehow, consonants without the flow of vowels, like a code rather than a true name. Ilra nodded once, then glanced nervously toward the window, where the storm continued to rage. A shudder passed through the slender frame. "You're running from something," Ethan said, more statement than question. Ilra's attention snapped back to him, those violet eyes widening. The alien made no reply but pulled the blankets tighter, one hand unconsciously rising to touch the brand on the neck. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Communication would be difficult. The official reports he'd seen years ago mentioned that most of the aliens, they called themselves Valsai, if he remembered correctly, spoke at least basic English after years of studying Earth's transmissions before making contact. But this one either didn't know the language well, or was too traumatized to use it. He looked around the cabin, then spotted his sketchpad on the bookshelf, rising slowly so as not to startle Lura. He retrieved it, along with a pencil, and returned to his seat. "Let's try this," he said, sketching a quick stick figure. He pointed to it, then to himself. "Ethan." Then he drew another, slightly different figure with longer limbs, and pointed to Lara. "Lara." The alien watched intently, then slowly extended a hand toward the pad. Ethan offered it, and Lara took the pencil with delicate precision. After studying it for a moment, the alien began to draw, not crude stick figures, but a detailed sketch of the cabin interior, remarkably accurate despite the speed with which it took shape. "You're an artist," Ethan murmured, impressed. Elra glanced up, then returned to the drawing, adding a figure that was clearly Ethan by the fire, then another figure, Elra, at the door. With a few more strokes, snow appeared around the second figure, and lines indicating cold or shivering. "Yes," Ethan nodded. "You were freezing out there." Elra continued drawing, adding a third figure in the distance behind the cabin, tall, bulky, with what appeared to be a weapon. Ethan frowned. "Someone's after you." Elra's hand trembled slightly, and the pencil made a harsh line across the paper. The alien set it down carefully, then nodded once, eyes downcast. Ethan considered his options. Harboring a fugitive, an alien fugitive no less, was far beyond the simple, isolated life he'd built for himself. Every instinct honed by years of survival urged him to send this complication away as soon as the weather permitted. But then, Laura looked up, and in those strange violet eyes, Ethan saw something he recognized all too well, the haunted look of someone who had seen too much cruelty, who expected nothing but more of the same from an indifferent universe. He'd seen that look in the mirror for years after leaving service. With a resigned sigh, Ethan rose and moved to a trunk near his bed. He unlocked it and rummaged inside, eventually pulling out a soft flannel shirt and a pair of sweatpants. "These will be too big, but they're clean and warm," he said, setting them on the floor halfway between them. "There's a bathroom through that door. You can change if you want." El-Ra looked at the clothes, then back at Ethan with a puzzled expression. "For you," Ethan clarified, miming putting on a shirt. "Your clothes are wet and torn." Understanding dawned in those alien features. With careful movements, El-Ra gathered the offered garments and stood, the blanket still clutched around thin shoulders. The alien was tall, nearly 7 feet, making Ethan feel unusually small as they passed each other. When Laura disappeared into the bathroom, Ethan exhaled slowly. What had he gotten himself into? He moved to the window, peering out into the storm. If someone was pursuing Laura, the weather was currently their best ally, obscuring tracks and making travel nearly impossible. But storms passed, and then what? Ethan's gaze fell on the small workbench in the corner, where various tools and electronics sat in organized rows. Among them, partially disassembled, was the perimeter defense system he'd been upgrading, originally designed to deter curious hikers or wildlife, but easily modified for more serious threats. Perhaps it was time to finish that project. When El-Ra emerged from the bathroom, the transformation was striking, clean. Dressed in Ethan's clothes, comically oversized but far better than the rags. With silver blue hair neatly combed, the alien looked less like a fugitive and more like a visitor from another world should, dignified, albeit still clearly exhausted. "Better?" Ethan asked. El-Ra nodded, then touched the soft flannel sleeve with evident wonder, as if unused to such comfort. "You should rest more," Ethan said, gesturing to the pile of blankets by the fire. "I'll keep watch." The alien hesitated, glancing between Ethan and the comfortable spot by the hearth. Fear and exhaustion warred visibly on those delicate features. Ethan understood the dilemma. Trust was a luxury neither of them could easily afford. In a gesture of reassurance, he moved his shotgun from beside his chair to the far corner of the room, well out of reach. "No weapons," he said. "Just rest." El-Ra's shoulders relaxed fractionally. The alien returned to the fireside and sank down onto the blankets, though this time maintaining a seated position, back against the stone hearth, knees drawn up protectively. Ethan returned to his workbench, deliberately turning his back, a calculated risk to demonstrate trust. He began tinkering with the perimeter sensors, though his awareness remained fixed on the presence behind him. Minutes stretched into an hour. The storm continued unabated, wind rattling the windows. When Ethan finally glanced over his shoulder, he found Laura had succumbed to exhaustion, slumped sideways on the blankets, eyes closed, breathing deep and even. In sleep, the alien looked younger somehow, the wariness erased from those otherworldly features. Ethan wondered how old Laura was in human terms, whether the being before him was considered young or old among their kind. He returned to his work with renewed purpose, soldering connections with steady hands. Whatever or whoever was pursuing El-Ra would eventually come looking. And when they did, Ethan intended to be ready. The night passed slowly. Ethan dozed in his chair, waking at every change in the storm's rhythm, every creak of the cabin's timbers. Laura slept deeply, occasionally twitching or making soft, distressed sounds, dreaming, perhaps, or reliving whatever traumas had led to this flight through a snowstorm. Dawn broke with surprising clarity, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the early morning hours. Sunlight glinted off the pristine snow blanketing the forest, so bright it hurt the eyes. Ethan stood at the window, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement, any indication they were being watched. Nothing but unbroken white and the occasional snow falling from overburdened branches. Behind him, he heard Laura stir and turned to find the alien sitting up, blinking in the morning light. Those violet eyes seemed less fearful today, though caution remained. "Morning," Ethan said, moving to the small kitchen area. "Hungry?" Elra nodded, watching as Ethan began preparing a simple breakfast of oatmeal with dried fruits. The alien's gaze followed his movements with intense interest, as if memorizing the process. "The storm's passed," Ethan said conversationally as he worked, not expecting a response. "Beautiful day out there, though the temperature's dropped. Must be -20 at least." To his surprise, Laura spoke, the voice still soft but clearer than the previous night. "Cold. Dangerous." Ethan glanced over, nodding. "Very dangerous. You're lucky you found shelter when you did." Elra's hand rose again to touch the brand on the neck, now partially hidden by the flannel collar. "Lucky," the alien repeated, though the tone suggested the word held little meaning. Ethan brought over 2 bowls of oatmeal, offering one to Laura. The alien accepted it with both hands, the long fingers cradling the warmth. "Where were you going?" Ethan asked, seating himself in his chair. "Before you found my cabin?" Elra looked down at the food, stirring it slowly. "Away," came the simple reply. Then, after a pause, "Anywhere, just away." 3 words, but they conveyed volumes. Ethan recognized the desperation of someone fleeing with no destination in mind, only the burning need to escape. He'd felt that same urgency after his last deployment, driving for days with no clear direction, just the need to put distance between himself and what he'd seen, what he'd done. "You can stay until you're stronger," he found himself saying, surprising himself with the offer. "It's not safe out there, especially not for someone unfamiliar with the terrain." Ulra's head lifted, those violet eyes widening in what might have been disbelief. "Why, help me?" A fair question, one Ethan wasn't entirely sure he could answer. He shrugged, focusing on his breakfast. "Leaving you to freeze wouldn't sit right," he said finally. "Besides, I'm curious. Don't get many visitors, especially not from other planets." This earned him something unexpected. A slight upward curve of Laura's mouth, almost a smile, quickly suppressed. The alien returned to eating, movements precise and efficient, wasting nothing. After breakfast, Ethan resumed work on the perimeter system, while Laura explored the cabin with cautious curiosity. The alien seemed particularly fascinated by his books, carefully removing one from the shelf and turning the pages with reverent gentleness. "You can read them if you want," Ethan offered, glancing up from his soldering. Elra looked uncertain. "Read. Some words. Not all. English isn't your first language, I'm guessing," Ethan said, setting down his tools. "How much do you understand when I speak?" "Most," Elra replied, returning the book to its exact position. "Speaking. Harder." Ethan nodded, remembering language classes from school. Comprehension always came before fluent speech. "What do your people call themselves? I remember hearing a name years ago, but—" "Valsai," Laura supplied, the word flowing with musical inflections impossible for a human tongue to replicate perfectly. "And your world? Does it have snow like this?" A shadow passed over Laura's features. "Not. My world. Born on ship. Lived on many worlds. Never. Home." The implication hung in the air between them. Never home. Always transient. Always belonging to someone else. The brand on Laura's neck seemed to stand out starkly despite being mostly hidden by the shirt collar. Before Ethan could formulate a response, Elra moved to the workbench, examining the tools laid out there. Long fingers hovered over a small pair of pliers, not touching, but clearly interested. "Do you know how to use tools?" Ethan asked. Elra nodded. "Built things. Fixed machines." A pause. Then, with a hint of pride, "Good with hands." Ethan considered this. then reached into a drawer and removed a small metal puzzle, interlocking rings that needed to be separated and rejoined in a specific pattern. A novelty item he'd acquired years ago, now mostly forgotten. "Try this," he said, offering it to Laura. "It's a puzzle." The alien accepted it curiously, turning the interconnected rings over, studying their configuration. Then, with surprising deftness, those long fingers began manipulating the metal, testing connections, discovering the hidden mechanisms. Within minutes, Elora had separated all the rings and laid them out in a perfect pattern on the workbench. "Impressive," Ethan said, genuinely surprised at the speed. "Most people take hours to figure that out." Elra reassembled the puzzle even faster, then offered it back to Ethan with something close to eagerness. "Again?" For the first time in longer than he could remember. Ethan laughed, a short, rusty sound, but genuine. "Keep it," he said. "I have more puzzles somewhere." The alien's fingers closed around the metal rings with a reverence that made something twist in Ethan's chest. Such simple joy from such a small object. He wondered how long it had been since Laura had been allowed to own anything. The day passed peacefully. Ethan continued his work on the perimeter system, explaining the basics to Laura, who proved to be not just intelligent, but knowledgeable about electronics. By mid-afternoon, they had installed sensors at key points around the cabin, with a central monitor on Ethan's workbench that would alert them to any approach. As dusk fell, bringing with it plummeting temperatures, they sat before the fire, sharing a simple dinner of stew. Laura had grown incrementally more comfortable, occasionally offering words or short phrases, though still startling at unexpected sounds. "Sleep," Ethan said when he noticed Laura's eyelids drooping. "I'll take first watch." The alien nodded gratefully and settled onto the blankets by the fire, curling into a position that reminded Ethan of a cat, compact, ready to spring up at the first sign of danger. Within minutes, exhaustion had claimed its due, and Laura's breathing deepened into sleep. Ethan moved quietly to the window, staring out at the moonlit snow. No tracks marred its perfect surface. No shadows moved among the trees. But the peace felt tenuous, a held breath before a plunge. He returned to his chair, shotgun across his knees, and prepared for a long night of vigilance. The nightmare began with a whimper. Ethan, dozing lightly in his chair, snapped awake at the sound. Elra thrashed beneath the blankets, locked in the grip of some terrible dream, making small, desperate noises of distress. "Laura," Ethan called softly, not wanting to startle the alien further. "Laura, wake up, it's just a dream." The alien bolted upright with a strangled cry, violet eyes wide and unseeing, hands raised defensively. Ethan remained perfectly still, making no move to approach. "You're safe," he said evenly. "You're in my cabin. No one else is here." Slowly, awareness returned to those alien features. Laura's breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, gradually slowed. The raised hands lowered, trembling visibly. "Sorry," the alien whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Don't be," Ethan replied. "We all have nightmares." Ulra looked at him sharply, as if searching for mockery or judgment. Finding none, the alien relaxed slightly, though sleep seemed unlikely to return soon. "Want to talk about it?" Ethan offered, not expecting acceptance. To his surprise, Elra nodded hesitantly. "Might help." The alien shifted, drawing the blankets closer despite the cabin's warmth. "Dream of before, ship, guards, pain when disobedient." Each word seemed dragged from somewhere deep and painful. Ethan remained silent, allowing Laura the space to continue or stop as needed. "Not person to them. Property. Asset." Elra's hand moved to the brand on the neck, fingers tracing its outline through the fabric. "Number here, not name." "They called you by a number?" Ethan asked quietly. Elra nodded. 74R3. Not Laura. Never. Real name. Is Elra your real name? A hesitation. Part. Safe part. Rest. Dangerous to say. Ethan understood the protective instinct. Names held power. To withhold one's true name was to retain some small measure of control in an uncontrollable situation. How long were you there? He asked carefully. Always, Laura replied, the simple word carrying immeasurable weight. Born to service. Mother was... The alien struggled, searching for words, then sketched a curved shape in the air that Ethan recognized as a pregnant belly. Your mother was pregnant when she was captured? Elra shook the silver-blue head. Mother was owned. I was born. Already property. The matter-of-fact tone with which Elra delivered this information struck Ethan harder than any emotional plea could have. He'd seen slavery during his deployments, the hollow eyes of those who had never known freedom, who couldn't even conceptualize a life of self-determination. How did you escape? He asked. Elra's expression darkened. Ship landed, transferred a new owner. Guard distracted. Ran into forest. A small gesture toward the window. Then snow, cold, almost. Gave up. Then saw light. Your cabin. Just luck. Then random chance that had brought this fugitive to his door, instead of freezing to death in the wilderness. Ethan wasn't sure if he believed in fate or divine intervention, but the coincidence seemed significant somehow, that of all the places Laura could have stumbled upon, it had been the home of someone who recognized the signs of captivity, who understood the desperate need for freedom. They'll be looking for you, Ethan said, not a question. Elra nodded, fear returning to those alien features. Expensive property. Will not abandon search easily. Let them look, Ethan said with quiet determination. They'll find this place well defended. The alien studied him, head tilted. Why risk? Not your fight. A fair question. One Ethan had been asking himself since opening his door to this unexpected complication. He had spent years cultivating isolation, avoiding entanglements, ensuring no one depended on him, and he depended on no one. Why throw that carefully constructed piece away for a stranger? An alien, no less. I've seen enough people treated as property, he said finally. Stood by too many times when I should have acted. Maybe I'm trying to balance the scales a bit. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was as much as he could articulate, even to himself. Something about Laura's quiet dignity, the careful way those long fingers handled every object as if it were precious. The alien's evident intelligence and gentle nature despite years of mistreatment. It awakened something in Ethan he'd thought long buried. A sense of purpose, of righteous anger. Elra seemed to accept this explanation, nodding slowly. Thank you, Ethan. The sound of his name in that melodic voice, spoken with genuine gratitude, sent an unexpected warmth through Ethan's chest. Try to get some more sleep, he said gruffly, uncomfortable with the emotion. I'll keep watch. The alien settled back onto the blankets, still wrapped tightly against imagined cold. But before closing those violet eyes, Elra spoke once more, so softly Ethan nearly missed it. In dreams, I see stars, free among them. Someday, perhaps. Then sleep reclaimed the exhausted fugitive, leaving Ethan to ponder those words as he resumed his vigil by the window, watching for movement in the moonlit forest. The next 3 days established a cautious routine. Ethan continued reinforcing the cabin's defenses, while Elra recovered strength, gradually speaking more, offering assistance with increasingly complex tasks. The alien proved remarkably adept with tools and electronics, often anticipating Ethan's needs before he expressed them. They shared meals, simple conversations, and an unspoken agreement not to discuss the future beyond immediate plans for the cabin's security. The present moment was precarious enough without borrowing tomorrow's concerns. On the 4th morning, as they sat drinking coffee, which Elra had developed a surprising fondness for. The alien suddenly stiffened, head turning toward the window, with an alertness that reminded Ethan of a deer sensing a predator. "What is it?" he asked, immediately on guard. "Humming," Laura whispered. "Distant, but coming closer." Ethan strained his ears but heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the forest. "What kind of humming?" "Engine. Not like your generator. Different. Smoother." Elra's hand trembled slightly, causing ripples in the coffee. "Ship engine." Ethan moved swiftly to the workbench, checking the perimeter sensors. They showed nothing yet, but if Laura could hear the approaching craft, it wouldn't be long before it came within range. "How did they find us?" he muttered, retrieving his binoculars from a drawer. "Tracker," Elra said, rising and pulling aside the flannel collar to reveal the brand. "In here. Thought. Range too short for them to detect from orbit. Was wrong." Ethan peered through the binoculars, scanning the sky above the tree line. Nothing yet, but the clear blue expanse suddenly seemed menacing in its exposure. "Can it be removed?" he asked, nodding toward the brand. Ulra's expression darkened. "Not without special tools. Attempts to remove cause." The alien made a sharp gesture toward the head. "Pain. Unconsciousness." "Clever bastards," Ethan growled. He'd seen similar fail-safes in military tech, devices designed to prevent tampering by incapacitating the user. "So we can't hide, and we can't run. That leaves standing our ground." He moved purposefully around the cabin, checking weapons, barricading windows, running through combat scenarios in his mind. Elra watched with increasing distress. "Should leave," the alien said suddenly. "They want me, not you. If gone when they arrive." "Not happening," Ethan cut in firmly. "They'll just track you down again, and next time you might not find help." "But you will be hurt," Laura insisted. "They do not care about human laws. We'll eliminate interference." Ethan paused in his preparations, looking directly at the alien. "I've faced worse odds." He hesitated, then added quietly, "and for causes I believed in far less." Before Laura could respond, the perimeter alarm chimed softly, a proximity alert from the furthest sensor. Ethan checked the monitor. A heat signature descending through the tree canopy, about half a mile west of the cabin. "They're here," he said grimly. "Get back from the windows." Elra complied, moving to the center of the room, those violet eyes wide with fear. Not for themselves, Ethan realized, but for him. It was an expression he recognized from civilians he'd tried to protect in war zones. The look that said, "Don't die for me. I'm not worth it." He'd never agreed with that assessment then. He didn't agree with it now. The humming grew louder, now audible even to Ethan's human ears. It had a strange, pulsating quality, rising and falling in patterns that seemed deliberately designed to disorient. Psychological warfare, he thought grimly, making their presence known, letting fear do half their work for them. Through the binoculars, he caught glimpses of something sleek and metallic moving through the trees, low to the ground. Not a large vessel, more like a shuttle or scout craft. The design was unlike anything human-made, with smooth, almost organic curves and a surface that seemed to ripple slightly, as if not entirely solid. "How many crew typically?" he asked, continuing his scan of the forest. "3," Elra replied. "Pilot, security officer, asset retrieval specialist." The clinical terminology made Ethan's jaw tighten. "Armed?" "Yes. Stun weapons primarily. Want merchandise undamaged." Merchandise. The word hung in the air, a stark reminder of the dehumanization Elra had endured. Ethan checked the shotgun's magazine, ensuring it was fully loaded. He had no illusions about outgunning advanced alien technology. But sometimes, primitive methods had their advantages. They were rarely expected. The perimeter alarm chimed again, this time from a closer sensor. The craft had landed, and someone, or something, was approaching on foot. They will offer terms first, Elra said quietly. Exchange. Credits for property. And if refused? Escalation, threats, then action. Ethan nodded, mentally preparing himself. It had been years since he'd been in combat, but some instincts never faded. The calm focus, the heightened awareness, the strategic assessment of terrain and resources, all returned like old friends. Stay back, he instructed. When they come, let me do the talking. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited. The humming had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Even the forest birds had gone quiet, sensing the intrusion of something unnatural in their domain. Then, clear and deliberate, knocking at the door. Ethan moved to position himself between the entrance and Lara. Shotgun held ready, but not raised. A clear warning without immediate threat. Occupant of dwelling, came a voice from outside, speaking English with an odd, flat intonation. We seek no conflict with humans. We pursue only retrieval of corporate property unlawfully removed from custody. Compliance will be financially rewarded. Ethan glanced at Lara, who had pressed back against the far wall, face drained of color, slender body trembling visibly. The alien gave an almost imperceptible shake of the head, a silent plea not to open the door. I have no property of yours, Ethan called back. Move on. A pause. Then, scan indicates target presence within dwelling. Final opportunity for peaceful resolution. Open door. Surrender asset 74R3. Receive compensation of 5,000 universal credits. Not interested in your credits, Ethan replied. There's no asset here. Only people. And people aren't property. Another pause. Longer this time. When the voice returned, it had hardened. Human interference in Vol-Sci contractual matters violates Treaty Section 7, Paragraph 12. Enforcement authorized under Retrieval Protocol 3. You have 30 seconds to comply before forced entry. Ethan tightened his grip on the shotgun. Try it. He glanced back at Lara, expecting to see increased terror. Instead, something strange had happened to the alien's expression. A stillness had come over those delicate features, a resolve that transformed fear into something else entirely. Ethan, Lara said quietly, let me speak to them.
What? No.
Please, there is one way, if brave enough. The determination in those violet eyes gave Ethan pause. He hesitated, then nodded once. I'm right here if it goes wrong. Elra moved forward, each step seeming to require immense effort. Yet the alien's bearing had changed. Shoulders straighter, head higher. Stopping beside Ethan, Elra called out in that melodic voice, now strong and clear. Retrieval team, I invoke right of self-declaration. Outside, a sudden silence fell. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Asset 74R3, the voice finally responded, noticeably less confident. Self-declaration requires proper witness and documentation. Return to custody for processing of claim. I claim the right before this human witness, Elra continued steadily, as permitted under judicial code when no Vol-Sci official is present. I will not return to custody. You will hear me. Ethan watched in amazement as Elra straightened to full height, seeming to grow more powerful with each word. Whatever was happening, it clearly had the pursuers unsettled. Proceed, came the reluctant response from outside. Elra stepped forward, placing a hand on the door, not opening it, but establishing proximity to those on the other side. I am not 74R3, the alien said, voice ringing with newfound authority. My true name is Aloriel, child of the quiet light. I declare myself a sovereign being, possessed of consciousness, free will, and self-awareness under the Sentient Rights Accord. I reject all claims of ownership upon my person. I stand as witness to my own sentience and claim the protection of the self-declaration statute. The words had a formal, ritual quality, as if L'Oreal, was reciting legal text long memorized but never before spoken aloud. Human. The voice outside addressed Ethan directly. Do you stand as witness to this declaration? Ethan looked at L'Oreal, seeing the silent plea in those violet eyes. He had no idea what this ritual meant, what consequences it might have, but he understood its importance. I witness this declaration, he said firmly. L'Oreal has demonstrated consciousness, intelligence, and self-determination in my presence. I affirm this declaration. A long silence followed. Ethan could almost feel the tension radiating through the door, the calculations being made by those outside. Finally, the voice returned, now formal and clipped. Declaration witnessed and recorded. Initial claim established pending review by Judicial Council. Retrieval suspended under Provisional Protection Order. L'Oreal's shoulders sagged slightly, relief evident in every line of that slender body. However, the voice continued, Tracker remains active for verification purposes. Any attempt to leave this planet will trigger immediate response. Judicial review estimated at 60 standard cycles. Remain available for summons. With that, the presence withdrew. Through the window, Ethan watched as three figures, humanoid, but clearly not human, with the same elongated limbs as L'Oreal and skin that shifted colors like oil on water, returned to their craft. The vessel rose silently, hovering momentarily above the tree line, then accelerated away with impossible speed, leaving only disturbed snow as evidence of its presence. Ethan lowered the shotgun, turning to L'Oreal with questions written across his face. What just happened? The alien, L'Oreal, sank into the nearest chair, exhaustion evident, but something new shining in those violet eyes. Hope. Self-declaration, L'Oreal explained, voice steadier than before. Ancient right, rarely invoked. When one claimed as property demonstrates personhood, sentience, self-awareness beyond, programmed responses, and that stops them from taking you? Temporarily. Claim must be evaluated by counsel. L'Oreal's long fingers twisted together. Many fail, return to owners, but some succeed, become citizens, free. And they just accept that. The people who think they own you must accept. Law predates. Current practices. Sacred tradition. To violate brings shame, loss of standing. L'Oreal glanced toward the window. But they will watch. Wait for mistake. Chance to disprove claim. Ethan processed this information, trying to understand the cultural dynamics at play. So, you're safe, as long as you stay here and don't try to leave the planet. For now, until ruling, L'Oreal looked at him directly. 60 cycles. Your days. 2 months. 2 months of waiting, of surveillance, of living under the shadow of a potential return to captivity. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, considering the implications. His solitary existence had just become infinitely more complicated, and extended far beyond the temporary shelter he'd initially offered. Yet, looking at L'Oreal, seeing the dignity with which the alien had stood before oppressors, the courage it must have taken to invoke this ancient right, Ethan found he couldn't regret his involvement. Well, he said finally, setting the shotgun aside. Looks like we have time to improve your English, then, and maybe you can teach me some of your language in return. L'Oreal's eyes widened in surprise. You would allow me to stay, even knowing they watch? Unless you have somewhere else you'd prefer to go. The alien shook the silver-blue head slowly. No, nowhere. Then it's settled. Ethan moved to the kitchen, needing the normalcy of routine to ground himself after the confrontation. Coffee? Yes, please, Eloriel replied, the formal phrase sounding carefully practiced. As Ethan prepared the drinks, he found himself wondering about the name, Eloriel, Child of the Quiet Light, so different from the abbreviated Lara the alien had initially offered. Names held power. Indeed. Your full name, he said, bringing over the steaming mugs.
It's beautiful. Why hide it?
Eloriel accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. Names are essence. To give true name is to give power over self, used in binding spells, control mechanisms. The alien traced the edge of the mug thoughtfully. But also in freedom rituals. Self-declaration requires true name, risk worth taking. And Child of the Quiet Light? Is that like a family name? Lineage marker. My mother was Light Singer, father unknown. But all children of Light Singers are light children. There was pain there, in the mention of Eloriel's mother, but also pride. Ethan didn't press further, recognizing the delicate balance between reclaiming identity and reopening wounds. They sat in companionable silence, sipping coffee, adjusting to the new reality of their situation. Outside, the sun climbed higher, sparkling off the snow with diamond brilliance. The forest resumed its normal sounds, birds calling, branches creaking in the light breeze, life continuing despite the brief alien intrusion. 2 months, Ethan said finally. We should make a plan. Supplies, security, communication. Eloriel nodded thoughtfully. I can help. Build things. Strengthen defenses. And we should get you proper clothes, Ethan added, eyeing the oversized flannel and sweatpants that hung on Eloriel's slender frame. I have some fabric. Basic sewing kit. Might be able to modify these to fit better. No sewing, Eloriel offered. Made maintenance uniforms on ship. Another glimpse into the alien's previous life. Skilled labor exploited for others' benefit. Ethan wondered what other talents had been similarly harvested. What potential had been deliberately constrained. We'll start tomorrow, he decided. Today, we rest. Recovery after combat is important, even when no shots are fired. Eloriel tilted her head, for Ethan had begun to think of the alien as female, though he realized the concept might not translate exactly across species. In curious consideration. You were soldier? She asked. Combat engineer, Ethan corrected. But yes, I saw my share of fighting. Is why you live alone, away from others? The question struck uncomfortably close to truths Ethan rarely examined. He considered deflecting, but found himself answering honestly. Partly. Saw too much over there. Did things I'm not proud of. Came back different. He stared into his coffee. People expect you to be who you were before, but that person doesn't exist anymore. Eloriel nodded slowly, understanding evident in those violet eyes. Reborn through fire, common among my people. Old self dies, new self emerges. Something like that, Ethan agreed. Except humans aren't always good at recognizing the new self. They keep looking for the old one. So you came here, where no one looks for anyone. Exactly. Eloriel considered this, then asked softly, Is better? Being alone? Ethan had asked himself that question many times over the years. Some days. The answer was an unequivocal yes. The peace, the self-sufficiency, the absence of expectations or judgments. Other days, usually in the deepest part of winter, when darkness seemed eternal. The answer was less certain. It's simpler, he said finally. Not always better. Eloriel accepted this with quiet acknowledgement. They lapsed into silence again. But it was a comfortable one, each lost in private reflections, yet somehow connected in their shared understanding of isolation. One chosen, one imposed, both leaving their marks. Outside, a light snow began to fall, adding fresh powder to the already blanketed landscape. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and for the first time in years, Ethan's cabin felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The days that followed established a new rhythm to life in the cabin. Mornings began with coffee, shared in comfortable silence, followed by practical tasks, reinforcing defenses, crafting better-fitting clothes for L'Oreal from Ethan's spare fabrics, hunting for fresh meat to supplement their stored provisions. Afternoons were devoted to language exchange. L'Oreal's English improved rapidly, vocabulary expanding, sentence structures growing more complex. In return, she taught Ethan basic phrases in the melodic Valsai tongue, though his human vocal cords struggled with some of the more nuanced tones. Evenings brought conversation by the fire, cautious at first, then gradually more open as trust deepened between them. L'Oreal spoke of her childhood on various vessels, always moving, always working, yet managing to find small wonders in the vastness of space. Ethan shared edited versions of his deployments, focusing on the people he'd met rather than the conflicts he'd fought, the cultures he'd glimpsed rather than the destruction he'd witnessed. Neither pressed the other for details that brought pain to the surface. They recognized in each other the fragile boundaries around certain memories, the careful navigation required to share a life without reopening its deepest wounds. 2 weeks after the confrontation with the retrieval team, Ethan returned from checking his hunting snares with a small haul of rabbits to find L'Oreal seated cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by dismantled pieces of his old music player, a device he'd long ago set aside when the batteries died and he'd had no way to replace them. "I hope that can be put back together," he said, hanging his coat by the door. L'Oreal looked up with a slight smile, a gesture she'd adopted more frequently as her comfort grew. "Better than before," she promised. "Found way to connect to your solar cells. Modification simple." Her technical vocabulary had expanded faster than any other category, revealing a deep knowledge of electronics and engineering that surpassed Ethan's considerable skills. He'd learned to trust her assertions in this domain, even when her methods seemed unorthodox by human standards. He began preparing the rabbits for stewing, a task that had initially disturbed L'Oreal until he explained the sustainable hunting practices he employed, the respect he showed for the animals that provided his food. Now she accepted it as part of their survival, though she preferred gathering the wild onions and herbs that flavored their meals. "Any signs out there?" she asked, her tone deliberately casual, though Ethan detected the underlying concern. "Nothing unusual," he assured her. "No tracks but mine and the wildlife." She nodded, returning to her work with those dexterous fingers, connecting wires too fine for Ethan to manipulate easily. He watched her for a moment, noting how much healthier she looked after weeks of regular meals and rest, her silver blue hair now gleaming, her posture straighter, the haunted look in her eyes less pronounced. The brand on her neck remained, of course, the tracker within it still active. Occasionally, they would glimpse a small drone high above the clearing, monitoring but not approaching. The implied surveillance was a constant reminder of their precarious situation, yet they had adapted to it with remarkable resilience. By evening, L'Oreal had completed her modifications to the music player. As they ate their rabbit stew by the fire, she presented it to Ethan with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "Should work now," she said. "Wanted to. Thank you for everything." Ethan accepted the device, turning it over in his hands with appreciation for the craftsmanship. The casing had been polished, dents hammered out, connections resoldered with precision. A small solar panel had been integrated into the top, connected to a storage cell of unfamiliar design. "Where did you get this?" he asked, tapping the cell. "Made it," L'Oreal replied. "From parts in your storage box, and small components from my tracker." Ethan looked up sharply. "Won't they detect that?" "Removed only passive elements. Tracker still functions, still reports location." She hesitated. Took risk. Wanted to give something beautiful. The gesture touched Ethan deeply. He pressed the power button, and to his amazement, the display illuminated for the first time in years. The few dozen songs he had loaded before his self-imposed exile scrolled across the screen. A catalog of a past life he had almost forgotten. "Thank you," he said simply, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Ella Rael's violet eyes shimmered in the firelight. "Music, important to my people, connects us to universal harmonies. Without it, spirit withers." Ethan selected a song. Something instrumental, gentle piano against a backdrop of subtle orchestration. The notes filled the cabin, clear and pristine despite the device's age. Ella Rael closed her eyes, her expression one of transported wonder, slender fingers moving slightly as if conducting. When the piece ended, she opened her eyes, a single tear tracing down her cheek. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Reminds me of Mother's songs, before they took her away." It was the most direct reference she had made to her mother's fate. Ethan didn't press for details, but he selected another song, this one with similar tonal qualities, creating space for whatever memories or emotions the music evoked. They listened together as the fire burned low, the music forming a bridge between their disparate experiences, their different worlds. When the final notes faded, a comfortable silence settled between them. "I dreamed of Earth," Eloriel said suddenly. "Before coming here. Saw transmissions, music, art, stories." She gazed into the embers. Humans fight, destroy, hate, like all species, but also create, protect, love fiercely. Her eyes lifted to meet Ethan's. "You embody this contradiction." "How so?" he asked, caught off guard by the observation. "Warrior who seeks peace, builder who destroys when necessary, solitary man who shelters stranger." She smiled faintly. "Fascinating species." Ethan chuckled. Unused to being analyzed as a representative of humanity rather than as an individual. "We're all contradictions, I think. Not just humans." "Yes," Eloriel agreed. "I too. Contradiction. Slave who yearns for stars. Technician who dreams of art. Survivor who fears living." The frank self-assessment lingered in the air between them, revealing depths Ethan had glimpsed, but never fully appreciated. He found himself wanting to know more, about her dreams beyond survival, her hopes beyond freedom, the person she might become when not defined by captivity or pursuit. But before he could form a question, the perimeter alarm chimed softly, the furthest sensor, the one marking the edge of his property where it met the forest road, rarely traveled. Ella Rael tensed immediately, the brief moment of openness vanishing behind the mask of vigilance both had worn too long. Ethan moved to the monitor, checking the readout with practiced efficiency. "Single heat signature," he reported. "Human-sized, moving slowly. Probably a hiker who got turned around." Despite the reasonable explanation, both remained on alert. Unexpected visitors were rare enough to warrant caution, especially given their circumstances. Ethan retrieved his binoculars, peering through the window into the gathering dusk. After several minutes, a figure emerged from the tree line, a man bundled against the cold, moving with the careful steps of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. No weapons visible, just a backpack and walking stick. "Forest ranger? Maybe," Ethan muttered. "Or lost tourist." "Should I hide?" Eloriel asked, already moving toward the back room. Ethan considered quickly. If this was an innocent encounter, hiding Eloriel might seem more suspicious than explaining her presence as a friend, staying for the winter. If it wasn't innocent, if this was some human agent of the Valsai, sent to gather information, or create a pretense for intervention, then hiding would only delay the inevitable. "No," he decided. "But stay behind me when I answer the door, and we'll use the name Lura, not your full name. Visitor doesn't need to know everything." She nodded, understanding the precaution. They waited as the figure approached the cabin, footsteps crunching in the snow, and finally knocked on the door. A normal, human knock, not the deliberate pattern of the retrieval team. Ethan opened the door partway, positioning himself in the gap, expression neutral but watchful. "Can I help you?" The man outside, bearded, probably in his 50s, with the weathered face of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, offered an apologetic smile. "Sorry to bother you. I'm Mark Tanner, Forest Service, doing welfare checks after that big storm last week. Some of the more remote cabins got hit pretty hard." He held up an ID card that matched his claim. Ethan relaxed marginally, but remained alert. "We're fine here," he said. "Built this place to withstand worse." Tanner nodded appreciatively. "Solid construction from what I can see. Still, policy is to check in person." His eyes shifted slightly, looking past Ethan to where Ella Rail stood partially visible in the background. A flicker of surprise crossed his features, but he masked it quickly. "Didn't realize you had company out here. Most folks in these parts tend to be solitary types." "Friend staying for the winter," Ethan said simply. "We're well stocked and the generator's running fine. No assistance needed." "Good to hear." Tanner seemed ready to leave, then hesitated. "Listen, not to alarm you, but we've had reports of unusual activity in the area. Strange lights, unidentified aircraft. Probably nothing. But if you see anything out of the ordinary, there's a number to call." He held out a card. Ethan accepted it with a non-committal nod, suspicion prickling at the back of his neck. Was this genuine concern from the Forest Service, or a more calculated attempt to gather information about the alien presence they knew was here? "Haven't seen anything unusual," he lied smoothly, "but we'll keep an eye out." "Appreciate it." Tanner glanced once more at L'Oreal, who had deliberately kept her face partially turned away, the collar of her modified shirt pulled high to hide the brand. "You two stay warm. Winter's just getting started." With that, he tipped his hat and turned away, trudging back toward the forest path. Ethan closed the door, turning to L'Oreal with a questioning look. "What do you think? Legitimate?" She considered, head tilted in that characteristic way. Seemed human, not Valsci agent, but... She frowned. "Timing is concerning." Ethan agreed. After weeks without human contact, this visit, coming right as they had begun to establish comfort, to lower their guard, felt potentially strategic. He moved to the window, watching until Tanner disappeared into the trees. Then checked the perimeter sensors again. "We'll increase patrols," he decided. "Take turns keeping watch at night." Ella Rail nodded, her brief moment of joy from the music now overshadowed by renewed wariness. Ethan felt a surge of anger at the intrusion, at the constant threat that kept them both from fully relaxing, fully connecting. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. She looked at him in surprise. "For what?" "That you can't just..." He gestured vaguely. "Exist. Without constantly looking over your shoulder. Without fear." Understanding softened her features. "Not your fault, Ethan." "Still..." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "You deserve better than this half-life, waiting for some alien council to decide whether you're a person or property." "Already decided," she said with quiet certainty. "I know what I am. Their ruling changes nothing about truth." The simple dignity in her statement humbled him. Despite everything she had endured, L'Oreal maintained an unshakable core of self-knowledge, a certainty about her own worth that transcended the judgments of others. It was a lesson Ethan himself was still learning, still struggling to internalize after years of defining himself through others' expectations and perceptions. "You're right," he acknowledged. "But I still want you to have freedom. Real freedom. Not just this limbo. Have more freedom now than ever before." she reminded him. Choice, voice, name. Her gaze met his directly. Friend. The word hung between them, simple yet profound. Friend. Not asset, not property, not even just a temporary refugee. Friend, implying equality, mutual respect, chosen connection. Ethan nodded, accepting the designation and all it entailed. Friend, he echoed. Outside, snow began to fall again, large flakes drifting lazily past the window. Inside, they resumed their places by the fire, the music player still resting between them. A bridge rebuilt after the momentary disruption, a promise of continued connection despite the shadows that still lurked beyond their walls. The night of the Rangers' visit marked a subtle shift in their routine. While daily life continued, the gathering of firewood, the preparation of meals, the ongoing improvements to the cabin's defenses, a new undercurrent of urgency ran beneath these tasks. Both felt the countdown more acutely, aware that the 60 days granted by the self-declaration would eventually expire, bringing whatever judgment the distant Valsai Council had reached. 38 days remained. Ethan increased his vigilance, spending hours each day patrolling the perimeter, checking and rechecking the sensors. L'Oreal focused on adapting more of his equipment, creating an early warning system integrated with the cabin's existing alarms that could detect Valsai energy signatures at greater distances. Neither spoke directly of preparations for potential conflict, yet both understood that possibility loomed. Instead, they channeled their concern into practical actions, into strengthening their position while they still had time. One evening, as Ethan returned from his patrol, he found L'Oreal seated at the small table by the window, carefully stitching fabric with the precise, efficient movements that characterized all her work. As he hung up his coat, she held up her creation, a patchwork blanket made from scraps of material she had salvaged from his storage chests. Each piece selected for color and texture, arranged in a pattern that seemed random at first glance, but revealed subtle symmetries upon closer inspection. For bed, she explained. Winter getting colder? Ethan approached, running his fingers over the careful stitching. The blanket was surprisingly heavy, with multiple layers providing insulation. It's beautiful, he said. Where did you learn to make something like this? Watched Mother, L'Oreal replied, her voice soft with memory. She made comfort objects from discards, small rebellions, creation from nothing. She smoothed the fabric with long fingers. Guards took them when found, but she always made more. A form of resistance, Ethan realized. In a life where everything, even one's own body, belonged to someone else, the act of creating something new, something unplanned by those in power, represented a profound assertion of selfhood. She would be proud, he said, to see what you've become. L'Oreal's violet eyes lifted to his face, searching for truth in the statement. Sometimes fear, becoming nothing, just running, hiding, never living. You're living, Ethan assured her. Every day you make choices, create things, speak your mind. That's living. Different from existing, she agreed. Took me time to understand difference. She set aside her sewing. What about you, Ethan? Are you living, or just existing here? Before I came. The question struck him like a physical blow, direct and unavoidable. He moved to the fire, adding a log to buy time, to compose his thoughts. Existing, he admitted finally. Maybe surviving, but not really living. He straightened, facing her. I told myself I wanted peace, simplicity. Truth was, I was hiding. From memories, from choices, from connection. And now, she asked softly. A smile, small but genuine, curved his mouth. Now I remember what it's like to have purpose, to protect something valuable, to... He hesitated, searching for the right words. to matter to someone. El nodded slowly. We heal each other. Unexpected symmetry. The observation was startlingly accurate. They had each arrived broken in their own ways. She physically abused and psychologically traumatized. He intact bodily, but emotionally scarred. Self-exiled from his own kind. In their unlikely alliance, both had found something they needed. She, safety, and recognition of her personhood. He, purpose and connection without the complications that had driven him from society. I never thanked you, Ethan said suddenly, for trusting me. That first night, you could have died in the snow rather than risk asking a stranger for help. Calculated risk, she replied, a hint of humor in her tone. Death certain and cold, only possibly at strangers' hands. Still, takes courage. Survival requires courage. Daily, hourly. She gazed into the fire. What requires more courage is hope. Before Ethan could respond, the perimeter alarm sounded, not the gentle chime of a distant approach, but the urgent alert of multiple intrusions. Multiple sensors triggered simultaneously. Both leapt to their feet. Ethan moving swiftly to the monitor, while Eloriel doused the main lights, plunging the cabin into darkness, save for the fire's glow. 6 signatures, Ethan reported tersely. Surrounding the clearing, moving in formation. He grabbed his shotgun from its rack. Not human patterns. Too coordinated, too fast. Eloriel's face had gone pale in the firelight. Retrieval team. Enhanced numbers. They're early, Ethan growled. The 60 days isn't up. May have accelerated timeline after Forest Ranger report. Ethan cursed under his breath. If Tanner had indeed been legitimate, his report of finding Eloriel here might have reached the wrong ears, triggering this premature response. Or perhaps he had been working for the Volsci all along. His visit, a reconnaissance mission. Either way, they were surrounded, outnumbered, with no time to implement their more elaborate defensive plans. Ethan quickly assessed their options, mind racing through combat scenarios with practiced efficiency. Back room, he decided. Single entry point, reinforced walls. We funnel them through the doorway if they breach the cabin. Eloriel nodded, gathering the few weapons they had prepared. A makeshift stun baton she had constructed from cabin electronics. A hunting knife for Ethan's offhand. They moved swiftly into the small bedroom at the rear of the cabin, securing the door behind them. Through the single window, they could see shadows moving at the edge of the clearing. Tall, fluid forms that seemed to shift and blend with the darkness. Ethan positioned himself by the door, shotgun raised, while Eloriel took station by the window, watching for approaches from that direction. If they take me, she said quietly, do not follow. They have no quarrel with you if I am reclaimed. Not happening, Ethan replied, his voice hard with determination. No one's taking you anywhere. Before she could argue further, a voice called out from the darkness, the same flat, artificial tone as before, but with an edge of authority that suggested a higher-ranking official. Human dwelling, final notice. The sentient designated Eloriel, claiming self-declaration rights, is ordered to surrender for immediate judicial review. New evidence has accelerated proceedings. Compliance is mandatory. Ethan and Eloriel exchanged glances. This was unexpected. Not a retrieval for return to ownership, but a summons for judicial review. Still, neither trusted the claim. It could easily be a pretext to get Eloriel outside, away from the cabin's protection. What new evidence? Ethan called back, moving to the main room while keeping Eloriel behind him. And why the armed approach for a simple summons? Evidence classification restricted, came the reply. Armed approach justified by previous hostility and suspected weapons development within dwelling. Ethan frowned. Weapons development. The defensive measures they had created were hardly advanced technology. Certainly nothing that would warrant this level of response. Unless... He turned to Eloriel, a suspicion forming. The music player, he said quietly. The components you used from your tracker. Could they have detected that modification as weapons tech? Her eyes widened in realization. Possible. Energy conversion similar between music storage and weapon charging. She looked stricken. My fault. Wanted to create something beautiful. Instead brought danger. Not your fault, Ethan assured her firmly. You couldn't have known they'd interpret it that way. He turned back toward the door. We need more information before we make any decisions. To the waiting Valsai, he called. We're not opening the door until we understand exactly what's happening. Judicial review isn't due for 38 more days. If the Council has truly accelerated proceedings, we require official documentation and transmission verification. A pause. Then, verification signals require direct interface with designated LRAIL. Must approach vessel for authentication. Convenient, Ethan muttered, then louder. Not happening. Send documentation via local transmission to our receiver. We can verify here. Another pause. Longer this time. Ethan could almost feel the frustration emanating from the darkness. These Valsai clearly expected compliance, not negotiation. Their standard procedures weren't designed for resistance, especially not from a species they likely considered primitive in comparison to their own. Finally, the voice returned. Alternative verification impossible without Council-authorized equipment. Final option. Neutral third-party witness to accompany designated LRAIL to verification point. Human may serve as witness if unarmed. Ethan considered this compromise. It still required Eloriel to leave the cabin's protection. But with him as a witness, the Valsai would be less likely to simply abduct her without following proper procedures. Whatever those were. He looked to Eloriel, raising an eyebrow in silent question. She hesitated, then nodded once, a gesture of trust that humbled him. We accept those terms, Ethan called. But I maintain visual contact at all times, and we approach no closer than 20 feet from your vessel. Verification happens in the clearing, not inside your ship. Another pause. Then, terms accepted. Exit dwelling unarmed. Approach central clearing. Ethan set down his shotgun reluctantly, keeping only a small knife concealed in his boot, technically breaking the agreement. But he wasn't about to approach potentially hostile aliens completely defenseless. He turned to Eloriel, who stood tall despite the fear evident in her violet eyes. Stay close to me, he said quietly. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, we retreat immediately to the cabin. She nodded, then did something unexpected. Reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. Whatever happens, she whispered. Thank you for everything. The simple gesture conveyed volumes. Ethan swallowed against a sudden tightness in his throat. Let's go. They exited the cabin together, the cold night air hitting them like a physical blow after the warmth inside. The clearing was bathed in silvery moonlight, snow glittering like scattered diamonds. At the far edge, a sleek vessel hovered just above the ground, different from the smaller craft Ethan had glimpsed during the first encounter. Larger, more imposing, with glowing symbols etched along its hull. 6 Valsai stood in formation, their heights varying but all towering over Ethan. Unlike Elarail's slender build, these individuals were broader, their silver-blue skin covered in what appeared to be form-fitting armor that rippled slightly with each movement. Their faces remained partially obscured by helmets with dark visors, revealing only the lower portions of features similar to Elarail's. One stepped forward, clearly the leader, with additional markings on the armor and a more commanding stance. Designated Elarail. Approach for verification. Ethan moved slightly in front of her, protective instinct overriding caution. Verification happens right here, he stated firmly. As agreed. The leader tilted its head in what might have been irritation, then raised a hand. Another Volsci approached, carrying what appeared to be a small, glowing orb. The leader addressed Eloriel directly. Council orb contains direct transmission from judicial authority. Place hand upon surface for identity confirmation and message receipt. Eloriel looked to Ethan, who nodded reluctantly. She stepped forward, extending one slender hand toward the orb. As her fingers made contact with its surface, the glow intensified, scanning up her arm and across her body in a wave of pale light. She gasped softly, eyes widening. "Verification complete," the leader announced. "Identity confirmed as genetic line 74R3. Self-designated Eloriel. Council message transmitting." The orb pulsed, and suddenly a holographic image appeared above it. Another Volsci. This one older, judging by the paler coloration and more elaborate garments. When it spoke, the voice resonated with authority. "Eloriel, child of the quiet light. Your self-declaration has been reviewed with unprecedented urgency due to classified security concerns. The modification of restricted tracking technology has triggered automatic protocol elevation." The holographic figure's expression remained inscrutable. However, testimony has been entered into record by Senior Judicial Observer Trellian regarding your demonstrated sentience, creative capability, and clear expression of self-determination. Ethan started at the mention of Senior Judicial Observer. Had Tanner, if that was even his real name, been a Volsci judge in disguise, evaluating Eloriel during his visit? The hologram continued. "Preliminary ruling grants, provisional personhood status, pending final determination after standard observation period. You are required to maintain location tracking, but are not subject to retrieval. Previous ownership claims are suspended indefinitely." Eloriel's hand trembled against the orb, her entire body tense with disbelief. The hologram flickered, then delivered its final statement. "The Council acknowledges your self-declaration is valid. You are recognized as a sovereign being under Interspecies Accord, Section 7. This ruling is binding upon all Volsci entities." With that, the hologram vanished, the orb's glow dimming to a soft pulse. The leader stepped back, making a formal gesture that Eloriel clearly recognized. Her posture straightened, a small gasp escaping her lips. "The acknowledgement of being," she whispered to Ethan. "Sacred gesture, never given to property." The leader spoke again, addressing them both. "Monitoring will continue as mandated, but no further direct contact will occur without judicial authorization. The human dwelling is recognized as sanctuary under treaty provisions." A pause. Then, with what seemed like reluctance, "The claim of personhood has been witnessed and recorded." With that, the Volsci began retreating toward their vessel, moving with fluid grace despite their size. The leader remained last, regarding them with an unreadable expression before turning away. As the ship rose silently into the night sky, its lights pulsing once before it accelerated beyond sight, Ethan and Eloriel stood motionless in the snow, processing what had just occurred. "Did that just happen?" Ethan asked finally, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Did they just leave? Recognize you as a person?" Eloriel turned to him, her face transformed by an expression he had never seen before. Pure, unadulterated joy breaking through like sunrise after the longest night. "Yes," she whispered. "Provisional now, but acknowledged. Legally, formally." Her voice caught. "Free." The word hung in the air between them, monumental in its simplicity. Free. Not completely. The tracking would continue. The final determination still pending. But the immediate threat of forced return had been lifted. The claim of ownership suspended indefinitely. Ethan found himself grinning, an unfamiliar stretch of facial muscles after years of stoic solitude. Without thinking, he reached out, pulling Eloriel into an embrace, an instinctive, human response to overwhelming emotion. She stiffened momentarily in surprise, then cautiously returned the gesture, her tall frame bending slightly to accommodate his height. It was awkward. Their physiologies not designed for such contact between species, yet somehow perfect in its genuine relief and shared triumph. When they separated, both somewhat embarrassed by the spontaneous display, Ethan gestured toward the cabin. "We should get back inside. It's freezing out here." Elarail nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the night sky, where the ship had disappeared. "They recognized me," she said softly, wonder threading through her voice. "After generations of my people treated as things, they saw me." Ethan understood the significance. Beyond the practical implications of safety and freedom from pursuit, this represented a profound validation of her essential being, an acknowledgement that she existed not as property, but as a person with rights, dignity, value. "They saw what I saw from the beginning," he said quietly. Her violet eyes shifted to his face, searching for meaning in his words. He hadn't intended to say it aloud, but found he didn't regret the admission. In the weeks they had shared his cabin, he had come to see Elarail not as alien or refugee or even friend, but simply as herself, a being of intelligence, creativity, courage, and gentle wisdom, someone worth protecting, worth knowing, worth caring for. They returned to the cabin in companionable silence, the enormity of what had transpired settling around them like the fresh snow that had begun to fall. Inside, Ethan rebuilt the fire while Elarail prepared hot drinks, their routine unchanged, yet somehow transformed by the night's events. "What happens now?" Ethan asked as they settled before the hearth, the familiar crackle of burning wood grounding them after the surreal encounter. Elarail considered the question, long fingers wrapped around her mug. "Monitoring continues. Final determination comes. Eventually. But no interference unless I—" She hesitated, searching for the word. "Regress. Show behavior inconsistent with sentience." "And you're free to— what? Go anywhere? Do anything?" "Within reason. Cannot leave planet while case pending. Cannot interfere with Volsci operations." She glanced at him. "But can stay here. If— welcome." The question behind the statement was clear. With the immediate danger past, their arrangement, born of necessity and crisis, required redefinition. Ethan had offered sanctuary to a fugitive. That fugitive was now, effectively, a free person. Did his offer still stand? Did she still want it? "You're welcome here as long as you want to stay," he said without hesitation. "This can be your home, not just a hiding place." Something softened in her expression. "Home," she repeated, as if testing the word for fit. "Never had one before, just places of confinement, or temporary shelter." "Well, now you do." Ethan gestured around the cabin. "It's not much, but it's safe, warm, and I—" He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the emotion threatening to surface. "I've grown used to having you around." A smile curved her mouth, fuller now, more natural after weeks of practice. High praise from solitary human. He chuckled, accepting the gentle teasing. "Yeah, well, turns out solitude isn't all it's cracked up to be." They lapsed into comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Outside, snow continued to fall, adding another layer to the blanket covering the forest, erasing the footprints from the clearing as if the night's confrontation had never occurred. Eventually, Elarail spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Mother told stories about ancestors before captivity became normal. Said we were star singers once, created cosmic harmonies, traveled between worlds, not as property but as artists, witnesses, story keepers." Ethan listened, hearing not just the words but the longing beneath them, the reaching toward an identity beyond trauma, a heritage beyond slavery. "Is that what you want to be?" he asked. "A star singer?" She considered this, head tilted in that characteristic way. "Want to create, learn, grow, maybe sing someday, when voice stronger." Her gaze met his. "Want to be more than survivor. Want to be fully alive." The simple declaration resonated deeply with Ethan. Wasn't that what he had been avoiding all these years in his self-imposed exile? The messy, complicated, sometimes painful experience of being fully alive? He had chosen existence over living, safety over connection, predictability over possibility. Until Eloriel had knocked on his door. "We'll figure it out together," he promised. One day at a time. The weeks that followed unfolded with a new sense of possibility, without the constant threat of pursuit hanging over them. Both Ethan and Eloriel found space to breathe, to explore interests beyond mere survival. The cabin, once a fortress, became a workshop, a studio, a place of creation and learning. Eloriel's technical skills flourished as she moved beyond defensive modifications to creative projects. A sound system that filled the cabin with music. A light array that projected star patterns on the ceiling during long winter nights. Even small, delicate sculptures, fashioned from scrap metal, each capturing some element of the natural world she was gradually exploring. Ethan found himself rediscovering old interests abandoned during his years of isolation. He unearthed sketchbooks, began drawing again, rough at first, then with increasing confidence. Eloriel proved an eager subject, her alien features challenging his human perceptions, forcing him to see with new eyes. They established a routine that balanced solitude and togetherness. Mornings were often spent apart, Ethan hunting or gathering supplies, Eloriel immersed in her latest project. Afternoons brought shared tasks, practical work maintaining the cabin and its systems. Evenings were for conversation, for music, for the exchange of stories and ideas. And through it all, something grew between them, a connection neither had anticipated, neither fully understood, yet both increasingly valued. Not quite friendship, not quite family, but something uniquely their own, bridging the vast differences in their origins, their experiences, their very biology. One evening, as spring's first tentative warmth began to soften winter's grip, they sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered landscape in hues of gold and rose. Eloriel had been unusually quiet all day, contemplative in a way that suggested important thoughts forming beneath the surface. "Ethan," she said finally, her voice soft but clear in the still air, "what happens when monitoring ends, when final determination comes?" He had wondered when this conversation would arrive. The provisional status granted by the Valsci Council couldn't last forever. Eventually, a final ruling would come, bringing with it new possibilities and choices. "That depends," he said carefully. "What do you want to happen?" She gazed at the horizon, where the first stars had begun to appear above the fading sunset. "Part of me wants to see everything, other humans, cities, ocean, which I've only seen in your books. Maybe meet others like me who have claimed freedom." Her long fingers twisted together in her lap. "But part fears leaving. Safety. You." The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Ethan understood the conflict, the tension between the pull of wider horizons and the comfort of the known, the secure. "We could do both," he suggested. "This place will always be here, a home base. But we could venture out sometimes, see some of those things you've only read about." She turned to him, violet eyes widening. "We? If you want," he said, suddenly uncertain. "I just assumed. But maybe you'd prefer to explore on your own, without—" "No," she interrupted, reaching out to touch his arm, a gesture she had adopted more frequently as their comfort with each other grew. "Want you with me? Just didn't think you would. Leave this place. Your sanctuary." Ethan looked out at the forest that had sheltered him for 5 years. The isolation that had both protected and limited him. "Maybe it's time for me to rejoin the world too," he said. "At least partially. On our terms." "Our terms," she repeated, something like wonder in her voice. Then, after a moment of contemplation, "Could bring music player, take pictures to draw later, visit only places with trees nearby, for when cities become too much." He smiled at her practical considerations. Her understanding of what would make such journeys manageable for someone as accustomed to solitude as he was. Exactly. Baby steps. And always this place to come back to. The conversation shifted to potential destinations, practical considerations, questions about how humans might react to a Volsci walking among them. But beneath the planning lay a deeper understanding, a commitment to move forward together, whatever form that might take. As darkness settled fully around them, Eloriel's voice broke a comfortable silence. "Ethan?" "Hmm? Can I stay with you? Not just now, but—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Forever?" The question held layers of meaning, practical, emotional, a reaching towards something permanent in a life that had known only transience and uncertainty. Ethan didn't answer immediately, wanting to give the moment the weight it deserved. Finally, he reached over and took her hand, those long, skilled fingers curling around his human ones in a grip that bridged worlds, species, experiences. He squeezed gently, the gesture conveying what words might complicate. "Yes, for as long as you want, forever, if that's what you choose." Elorayle's smile in the starlight told him she understood perfectly. Together, they watched as the night deepened, as countless stars emerged above the quiet forest. The tracker in Elorayle's neck still pulsed its signal to distant monitors. The final determination from the Volsci Council, still pending. Somewhere in the vast universe, others of her kind remained in captivity. The long journey toward universal recognition of their personhood barely begun. But here, in this moment, on this porch, something profound had already been established. A sanctuary not of walls and defenses, but of mutual recognition, of chosen connection, of shared belonging. As the first light of dawn began to melt the snow, Ethan and Eloriel remained side by side, watching the world transform once again, not as refugee and protector, not as alien and human, but simply as two beings who had found in each other something worth keeping. Forever.